Your kind needs to learn your place. Economy starts back there with the rest of the riffraff.
The words hit the air like a slap across the face at Chicago O'Hare International Airport's Terminal 3. Derek Morrison, 35, stood behind the Skyalite Airways first-class check-in counter with his arms crossed and contempt written across his weathered features. His navy blue uniform was pressed to perfection, his supervisor badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. But his eyes held nothing but disdain as they fixed on the young black woman standing before him. The woman didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She simply stood there in her gray hoodie and dark jeans, holding her phone with the digital boarding pass clearly visible on the screen. Her name was Alicia Brooks, though Derek Morrison had no idea he was about to make the biggest mistake of his professional life. Before we dive deeper into the story of justice and accountability, I want you to know where this is heading. In the next 30 minutes, Derek Morrison wouldn't just lose his job. He would lose his career, his reputation, and his future in the aviation industry, because the woman he just insulted owned the airline he worked for. But let's rewind to see exactly how this moment of truth began. It was 7:45 a.m. on a humid Tuesday morning in July. The terminal buzzed with the usual chaos of business travelers rushing to catch flights, families herding children through security lines, and the constant drone of departure announcements echoing through the cavernous space. Alicia Brooks walked through the automatic doors of Terminal 3 looking like any other passenger. Her gray hoodie was soft cashmere that cost more than Derek's monthly salary, but he couldn't tell the difference. Her dark jeans were designer, but they looked perfectly ordinary. Her white sneakers were limited edition, but to Derek's untrained eye, they were just another pair of shoes. What Derek didn't know was that Alicia was conducting an undercover assessment of her own company. 3 days ago, her board of directors at Meridian Holdings had presented her with troubling reports about Skyalite Airways, the airline they had acquired just 2 months prior. Customer complaints about discriminatory treatment were piling up. Social media was buzzing with stories of passengers being profiled, questioned, and humiliated. The previous management had dismissed these as isolated incidents, but Alicia didn't believe in isolated incidents when it came to human dignity. So, she had devised a simple test. She would travel as an ordinary passenger, dressed down and unrecognizable, to see exactly how her employees treated customers who didn't fit their preconceived notions of who belonged in first class. The first-class check-in line was mercifully short. Only 3 people ahead of her, all dressed in expensive suits and carrying luxury luggage. Behind her, the economy line stretched back toward the terminal entrance like a river of tired humanity. Business executives checked their phones impatiently. Wealthy retirees adjusted their jewelry. And at the counter, Derek Morrison served each passenger with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes but was professional enough to pass. When Alicia stepped forward, that smile vanished completely. Derek looked at her hoodie, then at her jeans, then back at her face with the kind of assessment that made assumptions based on appearance rather than reality. He didn't ask for her boarding pass. He didn't check her identification. He simply pointed toward the economy line with the casual cruelty of someone who had done this before. "Ma'am, the economy check-in is over there," he said, his voice carrying the false patience of someone explaining something obvious to someone he considered too stupid to understand. "This line is for first-class passengers only." Alicia remained perfectly still. Her voice was calm, steady, and carried the kind of quiet authority that came from years of boardroom negotiations and high-stakes decisions. "I have a first-class ticket," she said, holding up her phone. "Seat 1A. Derek glanced at the phone screen, but instead of scanning it, he let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Look, honey, I don't know how you got that ticket, but there's obviously been some kind of mistake. Maybe you purchased an upgrade that didn't go through, or maybe someone played a prank on you, but you can't just stand in this line because you want to." Behind the counter, Carlos Rivera, 24, a junior check-in agent with kind eyes and an uncomfortable expression, shifted nervously. He had been working at Skyalite for 8 months, and he had seen Derek handle situations like this before. It never sat right with him, but Derek was his supervisor and Carlos needed this job to support his family. Carlos said quietly, "Maybe we should just scan her boarding pass and see what the computer says." Derek shot him a look that could have melted steel. "Carlos, I've been doing this job for 12 years. I can spot a problem passenger from across the terminal. This woman is trying to scam her way into first class, and I'm not going to enable it." The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. Other passengers in line were beginning to notice. A businessman in a tailored suit checked his watch impatiently. An elderly woman with pearls and perfectly styled silver hair craned her neck to see what was causing the delay. And in the economy line, people were pulling out their phones. Sarah Martinez, a travel blogger from San Francisco, was standing about 20 feet away waiting for her turn at the economy counter when she heard Derek's raised voice. Something in his tone made her look up from her laptop. When she saw what was happening, she discreetly opened her camera app and started recording. Alicia took a deep breath. She had hoped it wouldn't come to this, but she wasn't surprised. "Sir, I would appreciate it if you would scan my boarding pass and verify my reservation instead of making assumptions about my ability to purchase a ticket." Derek's face flushed red. "I don't have to scan anything. I can look at you and see that you don't belong in first class. Your kind always tries to pull stunts like this, thinking you can sweet-talk your way into seats you can't afford. It's not happening on my watch." The terminal seemed to pause. The businessman behind Alicia stepped back slightly. The elderly woman's eyes widened. Carlos Rivera's face went pale, and Sarah Martinez zoomed in with her camera, capturing every word. That was when Alicia made a decision that would change everything. Instead of arguing, instead of demanding to speak to a manager, instead of making a scene, she simply pulled out a different phone. Not the phone with her boarding pass, but a secure device that connected directly to her legal team. She dialed a number from memory and waited. When the call connected, her voice remained perfectly calm. "This is Alicia Brooks. I'm at Chicago O'Hare Terminal 3 Skylight check-in counter. Please initiate Protocol 7 for discriminatory treatment assessment. Full documentation and legal review authorized." Derek Morrison had no idea what Protocol 7 was, but something in Alicia's voice made him pause. The way she spoke wasn't the voice of someone trying to scam an upgrade. It was the voice of someone with authority. Real authority. "What's Protocol 7? Carlos whispered. Derek ignored him, focusing on Alicia with growing unease. "Who are you calling some kind of complaint hotline? I'm not intimidated by threats, lady." Alicia ended the call and looked at Derek with the kind of steady gaze that had closed billion-dollar deals and launched international expansion plans. "I wasn't making threats, Mr. Morrison. I was documenting evidence of why you're about to lose your job." The words were spoken so quietly that Derek had to lean forward to hear them. But they hit him like a physical blow. There was something in her tone, something in the way she said his name, even though he hadn't introduced himself, something in the confidence with which she spoke that made his stomach clench with the first flutter of real fear. "Are you recording this?" he demanded, looking around at the growing crowd of passengers who had stopped to watch the confrontation. "I don't need to," Alicia replied. "Security cameras are recording everything. Your computer system is logging this interaction, and I suspect several passengers are already sharing this moment on social media." She was right. Sarah Martinez had switched to live streaming on Instagram. Her caption read, "Watching discrimination happen in real time at O'Hare. This is unacceptable." Already dozens of viewers were commenting and sharing the stream. Derek's supervisor confidence was beginning to crack. "Look, I don't know what game you're playing, but I'm going to call security if you don't move to the correct line right now." "Please do," Alicia said. "I think security would be very interested in reviewing this situation." Carlos Rivera couldn't take it anymore. "Derek, just scan her boarding pass. What's the worst that could happen?" Derek glared at him, but the mounting pressure from the growing crowd of onlookers and the strange confidence of this woman in the hoodie was beginning to wear him down. With exaggerated reluctance, he grabbed the handheld scanner from his belt and pointed it at Alicia's phone screen. The device beeped once, green light flashed, and Derek's face went white as he read the screen. Passenger Brooks Alicia. Seat 1A. Status Priority VIP. Special handling required. He blinked at the screen, then at Alicia, then back at the screen. This must be a mistake. The computer is glitching. Is it, Alicia asked, or did you just assume that a young black woman in casual clothes couldn't afford a first-class ticket? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around them, the crowd had grown larger. Passengers were openly recording now. Sarah Martinez's live stream had gained over 200 viewers in just a few minutes, and Derek Morrison realized that he had just made the kind of mistake that could end careers. But instead of backing down, instead of apologizing, instead of recognizing that he might be wrong, Derek doubled down on his prejudice. "I don't care what that machine says," he declared loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I know fraud when I see it. You probably hacked the system or used someone else's credit card. I'm calling security and having you arrested for attempting to board with falsified documents." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the ambient noise of the terminal seemed to fade as hundreds of passengers turned to stare at the unfolding drama. Sarah Martinez's live stream viewer count jumped to over 500. Comments were pouring in faster than she could read them, and Alicia Brooks stood perfectly still, watching Derek Morrison destroy his own life with every word. "Are you absolutely certain you want to make that call?" she asked quietly. "Lady, I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Derek reached for the phone at his station, dialing the 3-digit code for airport security. While he waited for the connection, Alicia made another call on her secure device. "Margaret," she said when the call connected, "it's happening exactly as we expected. The discrimination is not just cultural, it's deliberate and aggressive. I need you to prepare immediate termination paperwork for Chicago ground staff. Also, contact our legal team. We're going to need documentation of everything that happens in the next 10 minutes. Derek overheard part of the conversation, but the words didn't quite register. He was too focused on his call to security, too committed to his version of reality, where he was the hero protecting the integrity of first-class service from fraudulent passengers. "Security. This is Derek Morrison at Skylight Check-in Terminal 3. I need officers to respond for a passenger attempting to board with falsified credentials. Possible identity theft and credit card fraud. Female, black, approximately 25, 30, wearing a gray hoodie and jeans." He hung up with a satisfied expression. "Security will be here in 3 minutes. I hope whatever scam you're running was worth it because you're about to be arrested." Alicia looked at him with something that might have been pity. "Mr. Morrison, in your 12 years of working for this airline, how many black passengers have you accused of fraud?" The question caught him off guard. What does that have to do with anything? "Answer the question." How many? Derek's face flushed again. "I don't keep track of race. I just know fraud when I see it. And how often do you demand verification from white passengers with first-class tickets?" That's different. How Derek opened his mouth, then closed it. Around him, the crowd was listening to every word. Sarah Martinez had turned her phone to capture his face as he struggled to answer. Carlos Rivera was staring at his supervisor with growing horror, finally understanding what kind of person he had been working for. It's different because... Derek started, then stopped. Because there was no good way to finish that sentence. There was no explanation that wouldn't reveal the prejudice that had driven every decision he'd made that morning. Airport security arrived just as Derek ran out of words. 2 officers, both experienced professionals who had dealt with thousands of passenger disputes, approached the check-in counter with the weary patience of people who had seen everything. "What seems to be the problem here?" asked Officer Janet Thompson, a 10-year veteran of airport security, with steel gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Derek straightened up his confidence, returning now that backup had arrived. "This woman is attempting to board with fraudulent first-class credentials. I've verified that the ticket doesn't belong to her, and I suspect identity theft and credit card fraud." Officer Thompson looked at Alicia, taking in her calm demeanor and the way she stood without any of the nervous energy that usually accompanied people who were actually committing fraud. "Ma'am, can I see your identification and boarding pass?" Alicia handed over her driver's license and held up her phone with the digital boarding pass. Officer Thompson examined both carefully, then looked at Derek's computer screen where the verified reservation was still displayed. "Sir," she said to Derek, "according to your own system, this passenger is verified for seat 1A with special VIP handling." What exactly is fraudulent about this? Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. But look at her. She doesn't look like what, sir? And there it was, the moment when Derek Morrison had to either admit his prejudice or find some other excuse for his behavior. He chose poorly. "She doesn't look like she can afford a first-class ticket," he said. "People like her don't fly first class unless something shady is going on." The words echoed through the terminal like a gunshot. Officer Thompson's expression hardened. Carlos Rivera buried his face in his hands. Sarah Martinez's live stream exploded with comments of outrage and disbelief. And Alicia Brooks looked at Derek Morrison with the calm certainty of someone who had just gotten exactly the evidence she needed. Officer Thompson Alicia said quietly, "I'd like to file a formal complaint for discrimination based on race and socioeconomic profiling." "Ma'am, you absolutely have that right." "Sir," she said to Derek, "I'm going to need you to step away from your station while we sort this out." But Derek wasn't done. Even faced with the evidence of his own prejudice, even confronted by security, and recorded by dozens of passengers, he couldn't let it go. "This is ridiculous," he shouted. "I was doing my job. I was protecting the integrity of our first-class service. People like her have been scamming airlines for years, and I'm not going to let it happen on my watch." The silence that followed was so complete that you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Officer Thompson exchanged a look with her partner. Carlos Rivera slowly backed away from Derek as if he were radioactive. And Sarah Martinez's livestream viewer count hit 1000 as people shared the video across social media platforms. Alicia's phone rang. She answered it calmly. "Yes, Margaret. Yes, I heard every word. Yes, proceed with immediate termination. And Margaret, make sure legal knows that he just doubled down on his discrimination in front of witnesses and security cameras." She ended the call and looked at Derek with the same calm expression she'd maintained throughout the entire confrontation. "Mr. Morrison, you've just provided us with a perfect case study in why some people shouldn't work in customer service." Derek's bravado was finally beginning to crack. Something about the way she spoke, something about the phone call she'd just made, something about the confidence with which she handled the situation was starting to penetrate his prejudice-clouded judgment. Who are you?" he asked. Alicia smiled for the first time since the confrontation began. It wasn't a cruel smile or a triumphant smile. It was the smile of someone who was about to teach a very important lesson. Someone who believes that every passenger deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of how they're dressed or what they look like. Someone who thinks that judging people by their appearance rather than their character is not just wrong, it's expensive. She paused, letting the words sink in. And someone who has the authority to make sure that people who can't understand that simple concept find other lines of work. The Skyalite first-class lounge was a sanctuary of marble floors, leather seating, and soft jazz that promised refuge from the chaos of the main terminal. After the confrontation at check-in, Alicia needed a few minutes to process what had just happened and prepare for the flight ahead. She also needed to make some calls. Elena Vasquez, the lounge manager, greeted her with genuine professionalism. At 29, Elena had worked her way up from a customer service agent to management through hard work and a genuine commitment to hospitality. She scanned Alicia's boarding pass without a second glance and smiled warmly. "Welcome to the Skyalite Lounge, Miss Brooks. We have fresh sushi at the dining station, a selection of premium wines, and private shower facilities if you'd like to refresh before your flight. Is there anything specific I can help you with today, finally?" Alicia thought. Someone doing their job the right way. "Just a quiet corner and some sparkling water, please. Thank you for the warm welcome." Elena led her to a secluded seating area near the windows overlooking the tarmac. Alicia settled into a leather chair and pulled out her secure tablet. She had work to do. The tablet wasn't a standard iPad. It was a heavily modified device used by Meridian Holdings executives for sensitive corporate communications. Encrypted, secure, and connected to servers that could access any system within their corporate network, including Skylight Airways' complete personnel files, customer service records, and incident reports. Alicia opened a new report and began typing Subject Ground Staff Assessment, Chicago O'Hare Terminal 3, Employee Derek Morrison, Check-in Supervisor Incident, Racial Profiling, Customer Harassment, False Accusations. Recommendation: Immediate termination. Additional notes: Employee doubled down on discriminatory behavior when confronted by security, showing complete lack of awareness or remorse. She saved the file and opened another. Derek Morrison's employment record appeared on screen. 12 years with various airlines, most recently 18 months with Skylight. Customer complaints in his file dating back 3 years. Complaints that followed a pattern she recognized all too well. A black family from Atlanta delayed for additional verification. A Hispanic businessman questioned about his ability to afford his ticket. An elderly Asian woman subjected to extra security screening that other passengers were not required to undergo. All complaints filed. All complaints marked as unsubstantiated and resolved through counseling. Counseling that clearly hadn't worked. Her phone buzzed with a text from Margaret Collins. Her chief legal officer, Derek Morrison, has been placed on immediate suspension pending investigation. Carlos Rivera has been moved to different shift to avoid retaliation. Legal team standing by for full documentation review. Good. But Derek was just the beginning. If the ground staff were this comfortable with their prejudice, she could only imagine what was waiting for her on the actual flight. Elena Vasquez approached with a crystal glass of sparkling water and a small plate of artisanal nuts. "Is there anything else you need, Miss Brooks? You seem to be working hard." Alicia looked up from her tablet. Elena's concern seemed genuine, her service professional but not obsequious, a stark contrast to the treatment she'd received at check-in. "Elena, can I ask you something in your experience working for Skylight? How consistent is the service quality across different departments?" Elena paused, clearly choosing her words carefully. "Every department has its challenges, ma'am. Some staff members are more committed to our service standards than others. Have you ever witnessed or heard about passengers being treated poorly because of their race or appearance?" The question was direct, and Elena's reaction told Alicia everything she needed to know. The slight tightening around her eyes, the way she glanced around to make sure no one was listening, the careful consideration before she answered. "I believe that every passenger deserves respect," Elena said finally. "But I think some of my colleagues might need reminding of that from time to time." It was a diplomatic answer, but it was also an honest one. Alicia appreciated Elena's professionalism in not throwing her coworkers under the bus, but she also noted the careful phrasing that acknowledged problems without directly accusing anyone. "Thank you for your honesty, Elena. You're doing excellent work here." "Thank you, ma'am. If you need anything else, please don't hesitate to ask." As Elena walked away, Alicia's phone rang. The caller ID showed Thomas Patterson, CFO. "Thomas, good morning." Alicia Margaret briefed me on the check-in incident. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine. More importantly, we're getting exactly the evidence we suspected we would find. Derek Morrison just provided us with a textbook case of racial profiling, complete with security camera footage and witness testimony. Do you want to abort the rest of the assessment? We have enough to begin reforming ground operations." Alicia considered the suggestion. She could end the test, now reveal her identity, and start implementing changes immediately. But she knew that what had happened at check-in was probably just the tip of the iceberg. If she wanted to truly understand the scope of the problem, she needed to complete the full passenger experience. "No, I'm continuing with the flight. If the ground staff are this comfortable with discrimination, I need to see what's happening in the air. But I want legal standing by, and I want full recording capability activated on my devices." "Already done. Margaret has authorized Protocol 7 recording. Every interaction is being logged and documented. If anything else happens, you'll have ironclad evidence." "Good. And Thomas, start preparing comprehensive termination packages. I have a feeling we're going to need them." After ending the call, Alicia spent another 20 minutes in the lounge observing the way different passengers were treated. Elena and her staff maintained the same level of professionalism with everyone, regardless of age, race, or how they were dressed. It gave her hope that not all of Skylight service culture was poisoned, but she also noticed things that bothered her. The way some passengers looked at her when she sat in the first-class lounge. The subtle double-takes, the quiet comments to traveling companions, the assumption that she must be in the wrong place. Most people were polite enough to keep their thoughts to themselves, but the undercurrent of judgment was unmistakable. At 8:30 a.m., the boarding announcement for Flight 447 to Miami echoed through the lounge. Alicia gathered her belongings, thanked Elena for her excellent service, and walked toward the gate. She had a feeling the real test was about to begin. The jet bridge leading to Skylight Flight 447 smelled of aviation fuel and recycled air. Alicia walked down the inclined corridor with steady steps, her mind focused on what lay ahead. Behind her, she could hear the conversations of other first-class passengers, business executives discussing deals, wealthy retirees planning European vacations, and the general murmur of people accustomed to premium service. At the aircraft door, 2 flight attendants stood like sentinels greeting passengers. The younger one was Jessica Williams, 22, Hispanic with nervous energy and kind eyes. She was new to Skylight, having joined the crew just 4 months earlier after graduating from flight attendant training. The other was Victoria Ashford, 34, head purser, and the kind of woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a luxury magazine. Victoria's appearance was flawless in the way that suggested hours of careful preparation. Her blonde hair was pulled back in an elegant chignon that revealed perfectly sculpted cheekbones. Her makeup was subtle, but expertly applied, highlighting sharp blue eyes that seemed to catalog and judge everything they saw. Her uniform was tailored to fit her slender frame like a second skin, and she wore it with the confidence of someone who knew she looked stunning. But there was something cold in her beauty, something calculated in the way she smiled. It was the smile of someone who had learned that appearance could be a weapon, that looking perfect gave you power over people who didn't meet your standards. "Welcome aboard, Mr." Blackwood Victoria purred as Richard Blackwood, a distinguished-looking businessman in an expensive charcoal suit, approached the aircraft door. She practically glowed with deference as she took his jacket and ushered him toward his seat. "Seat 2A, as always. I've made sure we have your preferred champagne chilled and waiting." "Excellent as always," Victoria Richard replied with the casual entitlement of someone accustomed to special treatment. "I trust this flight will be as smooth as usual." "Of course, sir. We live to serve our valued passengers." James Peterson, a tech executive in his early 30s, was next in line. He received a professional greeting and directions to his seat without fanfare. Nothing wrong with the service, but notably less warm than what Richard had received. Then Alicia stepped up to the door. Victoria's smile didn't just fade, it was deleted. Her blue eyes swept over Alicia's casual attire with the kind of assessment that made assumptions and reached conclusions before any words were spoken. The silence stretched for several seconds, while Victoria processed what she was seeing. A young black woman in a hoodie and jeans, holding a first-class boarding pass. "Excuse me," Victoria said finally, her voice carrying the false patience of someone explaining something obvious to someone she considered intellectually deficient. "First class is at the front of the aircraft. You'll want to continue to the back for economy seating." Jessica Williams, standing beside Victoria, shifted uncomfortably. She had seen Alicia's boarding pass when she handed it over, had noticed the seat assignment clearly displayed as 1A, but she was too new and too intimidated by Victoria's commanding presence to speak up. "I'm in first class," Alicia said calmly, holding up her phone with the boarding pass visible. "Seat 1A. Victoria glanced at the screen dismissively. "I'm sorry, but there's obviously been some kind of error. First class has a certain standard that we maintain. I'm sure you understand." The words were carefully chosen to avoid direct accusations, but the meaning was unmistakable. Victoria was telling her she didn't belong in first class because of how she looked. James Peterson, already seated in 3C, was watching the interaction with growing discomfort. Something about Victoria's tone bothered him. He discreetly pulled out his phone and opened his social media app, thinking he might document whatever was about to happen. "What kind of standard?" Alicia asked, her voice remaining perfectly level. Victoria's smile became even more artificial. "Well, we expect our first-class passengers to dress appropriately for the premium cabin experience. It's about maintaining the right atmosphere for all our valued guests. And you've determined that my clothing doesn't meet that standard. I'm just trying to prevent any awkwardness for you or the other passengers. Perhaps we can arrange an upgrade for a future flight when you're more appropriately dressed." The condescension in Victoria's voice was like acid. She wasn't just refusing service, she was doing it in a way designed to humiliate and diminish. This wasn't policy. It was personal prejudice dressed up in corporate language. Richard Blackwood, already seated and sipping his champagne, called out from his seat. "Is there some kind of problem? We're supposed to be departing soon?" Victoria turned toward him with an apologetic smile. "Just a small seating confusion, Mr. Blackwood. Nothing that can't be resolved quickly." She turned back to Alicia with renewed confidence, emboldened by Richard's impatience. "I'm going to have to ask you to move to your correct seat now. We need to begin our departure preparations." Alicia remained perfectly still. "I would like you to scan my boarding pass and verify my seat assignment through your system. That won't be necessary. I can see clearly that there's been a mistake. Scan it." The two words carried such quiet authority that Victoria actually took a step back. But instead of complying, instead of doing the simple professional thing that would have resolved the situation immediately, she chose to escalate. "I don't take orders from passengers," Victoria said, her voice rising slightly. "And I certainly don't take orders from passengers who are trying to scam their way into seats they can't afford." The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. Jessica Williams gasped audibly. James Peterson's finger hovered over the record button on his phone, and somewhere in the back of the plane, other passengers began to notice that something unusual was happening in first class. Alicia looked at Victoria with the same calm expression she'd maintained throughout the encounter. "Miss Ashford, I'm going to give you one more opportunity to handle this professionally. Please scan my boarding pass and verify my seat assignment." Victoria blinked, startled. "How did you know my name?" "Your name tag. Now, please scan my boarding pass. I've already told you that won't be necessary. Security will be here shortly to escort you to your proper seat." That was when Alicia made a decision that would change the trajectory of Victoria Ashford's life forever. Instead of arguing further, instead of demanding to speak to the captain, instead of making threats or raising her voice, she simply pulled out her phone and made a call. "Margaret," she said when the call connected, "we have a second incident. Flight crew this time." "Yes, it's exactly what we expected. Prepare termination paperwork for Victoria Ashford, head purser. Flight 447. Also, prepare documentation for a formal discrimination complaint with the FAA." Victoria's face went white. Something about the way Alicia spoke, something about the professional nature of the call, something about the confidence in her voice suggested that this wasn't a passenger making empty threats. "Who? Who were you calling?" Victoria demanded. Alicia ended the call and looked at her with the same steady gaze that had unnerved Derek Morrison at check-in. "Someone who has the authority to ensure that discrimination doesn't happen on Skylight flights. You're lying. You're just trying to intimidate me because I caught you trying to steal a first-class seat." James Peterson couldn't take it anymore. He pressed record and started live streaming on Instagram. "This is unbelievable," he muttered into his phone. "Flight attendant is refusing to let a passenger board because of how she's dressed." The live stream immediately began gaining viewers. Comments started pouring in as people shared the video, and somewhere in the back of the plane, other passengers were pulling out their phones to record the confrontation. Victoria noticed the phones and felt a flutter of panic. But instead of backing down, instead of reconsidering her position, instead of simply scanning the boarding pass like any reasonable person would do, She doubled down on her prejudice. "Turn those cameras off immediately," she demanded. "This is a security issue and I won't have it recorded." "Actually," Alicia said quietly, "I think transparency is exactly what we need right now." Her phone rang. She answered it calmly. "Yes, Thomas. Yes, I can hear everything. Yes, she just called it a security issue and demanded that witnesses stop recording. Please make sure legal has all of this documented." She ended the call and looked at Victoria with something that might have been pity. "Miss Ashford, you're about to learn a very expensive lesson about the difference between authority and prejudice." But Victoria Ashford wasn't done. She was beautiful, she was powerful in her domain, and she had never been challenged by someone she considered beneath her station. The idea that this woman in casual clothes could threaten her position was absurd. So she made the decision that would end her career. "Security to first class immediately," she announced over the aircraft intercom. "We have a passenger attempting to board with fraudulent credentials, possible identity theft and credit card fraud." The announcement echoed through the cabin, ensuring that every passenger on the flight would witness what came next. James Peterson's live stream viewer count jumped to over 500. Comments were exploding across the screen, and Alicia Brooks stood perfectly calm watching Victoria Ashford destroy her own future one word at a time. The aircraft cabin fell into an uncomfortable silence after Victoria's announcement. Every passenger within earshot turned to stare at the unfolding drama in first class. The hum of the air conditioning seemed louder somehow, and even the usual bustle of passengers settling into their seats paused as people tried to understand what they were witnessing. Victoria Ashford stood in the doorway of the aircraft like a beautiful sentinel, her perfectly applied makeup and elegant uniform creating a stark contrast with the ugliness of her words. She looked at Alicia with the kind of cold satisfaction that comes from believing you've just won a battle. In her mind, she had successfully protected the sanctity of first class from someone who clearly didn't belong there. "People like you don't fly first class," Victoria said, her voice carrying clearly through the cabin. "You may have found some way to game the system, but I've been doing this job for 8 years and I know fraud when I see it. Security will escort you to your real seat in the back, where people like you belong." The words hit the cabin like a physical blow. James Peterson, still live-streaming from seat 3C, zoomed in on Victoria's face as she spoke. His viewer count had climbed to over 800, and comments were scrolling by too fast to read. Sarah Martinez, the travel blogger who had witnessed the check-in incident, had somehow managed to get on the same flight and was recording from seat 5A. Her earlier video from the terminal had already gone viral, and this new footage was adding fuel to the fire. Alicia remained perfectly still, her voice calm and measured. "Miss Ashford, I would like you to scan my boarding pass and verify my reservation through your computer system." Victoria let out a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "I don't need to scan anything. I can look at you and know that you don't belong in seat 1A. Check your passenger manifest, Victoria. Alicia Brooks, seat 1A, special VIP handling. I've already told you that there's been some kind of mistake or fraud. Probably used someone else's credit card. This is identity theft, and I'm not going to be complicit in it." Jessica Williams, the young Hispanic flight attendant standing beside Victoria, was visibly trembling. In her 4 months with Skylight, she had never seen anything like this. She wanted to speak up, wanted to suggest that maybe they should just scan the boarding pass like the passenger requested, but Victoria's commanding presence was intimidating, and Jessica was afraid of losing her job if she contradicted her supervisor. "Miss Ashford," Jessica said quietly. "Maybe we should just Jessica go check on the passengers in economy," Victoria snapped without taking her eyes off Alicia. "I can handle this situation." Richard Blackwood, growing impatient in seat 2A, set down his champagne glass with an audible clink. "For heaven's sake, what's taking so long? Some of us have connections to make." Victoria turned to him with an apologetic smile that was completely different from the cold mask she'd shown Alicia. "I'm so sorry for the delay, Mr. Blackwood. We're just dealing with a passenger who seems to be confused about her seat assignment." Richard looked past Victoria at Alicia, taking in her casual attire with obvious disapproval. "Well, it's obvious she doesn't belong in first class. Why don't you just move her to where she's supposed to be so we can get on with the flight?" The casual cruelty of his dismissal was stunning. He wasn't even talking to Alicia directly. He was talking about her as if she weren't there, as if she were an object to be moved rather than a human being deserving basic respect. "That's exactly what I'm trying to do," Sir Victoria replied. "Unfortunately, some passengers think they can argue their way into seats they haven't paid for." Around the cabin, other passengers were beginning to react. Some pulled out phones to record the confrontation. Others looked uncomfortable but said nothing. A few seemed to agree with Victoria and Richard, nodding their approval at what they saw as proper enforcement of first-class standards. But in Seat 7, Marcus Williams, a civil rights attorney traveling to Miami for a conference, was watching with growing outrage. He had seen this kind of discrimination before, had fought against it in courtrooms across the country, and he recognized exactly what was happening. "Excuse me," he called out, standing up in his seat. "I'm an attorney, and what I'm witnessing here appears to be textbook discrimination. This passenger has a valid boarding pass for Seat 1A. There's no legal justification for refusing her service based on her appearance." Victoria spun around to face him, her beautiful features twisted with annoyance. "Sir, please sit down. This is a security matter, and I don't need legal advice from passengers." "Actually, you do," Marcus replied calmly, "because what you're doing is illegal under federal civil rights laws. And since everyone is recording this, you're creating evidence that could be used against both you personally and this airline in a discrimination lawsuit." James Peterson's live stream exploded with comments. Viewers were sharing the video across social media platforms. The hashtag Skylight Discrimination was starting to trend. And Victoria Ashford was completely oblivious to the fact that her career was being destroyed in real time. "I don't care who you think you are," Victoria said to Marcus. "I'm the head purser on this aircraft, and I have the authority to determine passenger seating based on security and safety concerns." "What security concern?" Alicia asked quietly. "I'm standing calmly, speaking respectfully, and asking only that you verify my seat assignment through your computer system." "What exactly is the security threat?" Victoria turned back to her, and for a moment her mask slipped. The real Victoria showed through, not the professional flight attendant, not the customer service representative, but the woman who believed that certain people belonged in certain places and that it was her job to enforce those boundaries. "The security threat is fraud," she said. "The threat is people like you thinking you can scam your way into first class by pretending to be someone you're not. The threat is passengers who lie about their ability to afford premium seating and then expect us to just go along with it. People like me. You know exactly what I mean." And there it was, the raw prejudice that had been lurking beneath the surface of every interaction. Victoria Ashford had just revealed that her objections had nothing to do with security, nothing to do with procedures, and everything to do with her assumption that a young black woman in casual clothes couldn't legitimately belong in first class. Alicia's phone rang. She answered it calmly, her voice carrying clearly through the now silent cabin. "Yes, Margaret." "Yes, I heard every word." "Yes, she just made it explicitly clear that this is about race, not security. Please proceed with immediate termination paperwork and contact the FAA about discrimination complaints." She ended the call and looked at Victoria with the same steady gaze that had unnerved everyone she'd encountered that morning. "Miss Ashford, you've just provided us with a perfect example of why some people shouldn't work in customer service." Victoria's confidence was beginning to crack. Something about the professional nature of Alicia's phone call, something about the way she spoke with calm authority, something about the growing crowd of witnesses was starting to penetrate her prejudice-clouded judgment. Who do you keep calling people who have the authority to ensure that passengers are treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their race or appearance? You're lying. You're just trying to intimidate me because I caught you trying to steal a seat. That was when Richard Blackwood made his contribution to the disaster. Standing up in his seat and turning to face the cabin full of recording passengers, he declared in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "This is exactly what's wrong with air travel today. People who can't afford first class trying to sneak in through some kind of scam and then crying discrimination when they get caught. I fly this route every month, and I know what a real first-class passenger looks like. He gestured toward Alicia with obvious disdain. Look at her. Does she look like she can afford a $2,000 ticket? That jewelry is probably fake, those clothes are clearly cheap, and she's probably hoping to get an upgrade by making a scene. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Victoria looked uncomfortable with Richard's naked prejudice. Marcus Williams was standing again, his lawyer's mind already cataloging the evidence for future legal proceedings. And Alicia Brooks stood perfectly calm in the center of the storm, watching her employees and passenger destroy their own lives with every word. James Peterson's live stream had gained over 500 viewers. Comments were pouring in from people expressing outrage, disbelief, and support for the passenger being discriminated against. The hashtag Skylight discrimination was trending nationally. News outlets were beginning to pick up the story, and none of the people involved in creating this disaster had any idea that they were about to become infamous. Mr. Blackwood, Alicia said quietly, "You've just made some very interesting assumptions about my financial status based on my appearance." "Would you care to explain the logic behind those assumptions?" Richard puffed up with the confidence of someone who had never been challenged about his prejudices. Logic. It's obvious. People who can afford first class dress appropriately and conduct themselves with proper decorum. They don't try to sneak into premium cabins wearing hoodies and sneakers. And you've determined that my clothing indicates I can't afford this ticket, lady. That hoodie probably cost $20 at Target. Those jeans look like something a college student would wear. And those sneakers are definitely not the kind of footwear you'd expect from someone with money. What Richard didn't know was that Alicia's hoodie was hand-woven cashmere from a boutique Italian designer that cost more than his monthly salary. Her jeans were from a luxury denim company that celebrities wore on red carpets. And her sneakers were limited edition collector's items that sold for more than most people spent on their cars. But, more importantly, what Richard didn't know was that it didn't matter. Even if her clothes had come from discount stores, even if she had dressed in the cheapest possible attire, she still deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. The price of someone's clothing had nothing to do with their worth as a human being, or their right to customer service. "So you believe that a person's clothing determines their value?" Alicia asked. "I believe that people should dress appropriately for the situation they're in. First class is a premium experience, and it should be reserved for people who understand and appreciate that experience. And you've determined that I don't understand or appreciate premium service based on my appearance." Richard was digging himself deeper with every word, but he was too blinded by his own arrogance to realize it. "Look, I'm not trying to be mean, but facts are facts. You don't look like you belong here, you don't act like you belong here, and frankly, you probably don't belong here." Victoria nodded her agreement, emboldened by Richard's support. Exactly. This is about maintaining standards and protecting the experience for passengers who actually paid for first-class service. Marcus Williams couldn't contain himself any longer. What you're both describing is textbook discrimination. You're making assumptions about this passenger's ability to afford her ticket based solely on her race and clothing. That's illegal, it's morally wrong, and it's being recorded by dozens of witnesses. "Oh, please," Richard scoffed. "Everything is discrimination these days. Sometimes a scam is just a scam, and sometimes people need to be called out for trying to get something they haven't earned. And how exactly have you determined that she hasn't earned her seat by looking at her?" And there it was again. The admission that their objections were based entirely on appearance, not on any actual evidence of wrongdoing. Richard Blackwood and Victoria Ashford had just confessed to discrimination in front of a cabin full of witnesses and live-streaming cameras. Alicia's phone rang again. She answered it with the same calm professionalism she'd displayed throughout the entire confrontation. "Yes, Thomas. Yes, I heard every word. Yes, they've made it completely clear that this is about race and socioeconomic profiling. Please add Mr. Blackwood to the permanent no-fly list and ensure that legal has documentation of all his statements." She ended the call and looked at Richard with the same steady gaze that had unnerved everyone else. Mr. Blackwood, you've just provided us with an excellent example of how prejudice can destroy someone's life in real time. Richard's face was beginning to turn red. Are you threatening me because I don't respond well to threats from people trying to scam their way into first class? I'm not threatening anyone. I'm simply documenting evidence of discrimination for future legal proceedings. Legal proceedings, you're going to sue because a flight attendant caught you trying to steal a seat. I'm going to ensure that passengers are treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their appearance or race. Victoria was getting nervous. The phones, the calls, the calm confidence with which this passenger was handling the situation, none of it matched her assumptions about someone trying to scam their way into first class. Real fraudsters usually became defensive when challenged. They made excuses, got angry, or tried to leave quickly. They didn't calmly make professional phone calls and speak about legal proceedings with the confidence of someone who actually had legal resources. Look, Victoria said, her voice beginning to waver. Maybe there's been a misunderstanding. Why don't you just show me some identification and we can sort this out quietly? But it was too late for quiet resolution. Richard Blackwood wasn't done talking, and every word that came out of his mouth was digging the hole deeper for all of them. Identification, he laughed. She probably has fake ID to go with the fake boarding pass. I've seen this scam before. These people get someone's credit card information, book a ticket, print a boarding pass, and hope to bluff their way into a seat they can't afford. These people— Marcus Williams stood up again, his voice sharp with indignation. What exactly do you mean by these people, Mr. Blackwood? Richard realized he had stepped over a line, but instead of backing down, he doubled down. You know what I mean. People who try to game the system. People who think rules don't apply to them. People who cry discrimination every time someone calls them out on their behavior. People who are black— You mean I didn't say anything about race? You're the one making this about race. Then, what did you mean by these people? Richard's mouth opened and closed as he struggled to find an answer that wouldn't sound overtly racist. But there was no good answer because his entire argument was based on racial prejudice thinly disguised as concern about airline security. Around the cabin, passengers were recording every word. The live streams were being shared across social media platforms. News outlets were beginning to reach out to passengers for comments. And somewhere in corporate offices across the country, executives were watching their reputations being destroyed in real time. Alicia waited patiently for Richard to find his words, knowing that anything he said would only make things worse for him. She had dealt with men like Richard Blackwood before, men who believed their wealth and status gave them the right to treat other people as inferior men who used coded language to express prejudice they were too cowardly to state directly. I meant, Richard said finally, people who don't belong in first class trying to get into first class through dishonest means. And you've determined that she doesn't belong in first class, and by using my eyes and my common sense. To assess what exactly? To assess whether someone looks like they can afford a $2,000 ticket. And there was the confession that would end his social and professional life. Richard Blackwood had just admitted in front of dozens of witnesses and live streaming cameras that he judged people's financial status and worthiness based on their appearance. He had revealed himself as the kind of person who believed that certain people belonged in certain places, and that he had the right to enforce those boundaries. Victoria realized that Richard was making things worse for both of them, but she couldn't seem to stop the disaster from unfolding. Every instinct told her to simply scan the boarding pass and resolve the situation, but her pride and prejudice wouldn't let her admit that she might have been wrong. Security should be here any minute, she said, trying to regain control of the situation. They can sort this out and escort her to her proper seat. And if security determines that my seat assignment is correct, Alicia asked, then we'll figure it out. Will you apologize for your assumptions? Victoria's silence was answer enough. Even faced with the possibility that she might be wrong, even confronted with the evidence of her own prejudice, she couldn't bring herself to consider that she might owe this passenger an apology. That silence stretched through the cabin like a spreading stain. Everyone could see it now, the ugly truth beneath the professional uniforms and polite language. This wasn't about security or procedures or maintaining standards. This was about people in positions of power using that power to diminish and humiliate someone they considered beneath them. James Peterson's live stream had reached 2,000 viewers. The comments were a mix of outraged support for the passenger and calls for boycotts of Skyalite Airways. The hashtag Skyalite discrimination was spreading across Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. And traditional media outlets were beginning to pick up the story. But the real disaster was just beginning. Because security was about to arrive, and Alicia Brooks was about to reveal exactly who she was and why the people who had discriminated against her were about to lose everything. Airport security arrived in the form of Officer Janet Thompson and her partner, Officer Mike Rodriguez, the same team that had responded to the check-in incident. They boarded the aircraft with the weary professionalism of people who had seen every possible passenger dispute and expected this to be just another routine problem to solve. But the moment they stepped into the first-class cabin, they could feel the tension. Passengers were recording with their phones, 2 people were live streaming, and the energy in the confined space was electric with barely contained conflict. "What seems to be the problem here?" Officer Thompson asked, looking between Victoria and Alicia with the neutral expression of someone determined to get facts before making judgments. Victoria straightened her uniform and put on her most professional voice. "Officers, thank you for responding so quickly. We have a passenger who appears to be traveling on fraudulent credentials. She's refusing to move to her correct seat and has been disruptive to other passengers." Officer Thompson looked at Alicia, who was standing quietly in the same spot she had occupied throughout the entire confrontation. "Ma'am, you seem pretty calm for someone who's supposedly being disruptive." "What's your side of the story? I have a valid boarding pass for seat 1A, Alicia replied calmly. "I've asked multiple times for the flight crew to scan my boarding pass and verify my reservation, but they've refused to do so. Instead, they've made assumptions about my ability to afford this ticket based on my appearance and race." Officer Rodriguez frowned. "Ma'am, we actually dealt with you earlier at the check-in counter, didn't we? With a supervisor who made similar accusations. You did. That situation was resolved when it was determined that my credentials were valid and that the accusations were based on discriminatory profiling." Victoria's face went pale. She hadn't realized that this passenger had already been through a discrimination incident that morning, or that security had already verified her credentials once. I wasn't aware of any previous incident." "Maybe you should have been," Officer Thompson said dryly. "Ma'am," she said to Alicia, "may I see your boarding pass and identification?" Alicia handed over her driver's license and held up her phone with the digital boarding pass clearly displayed. Officer Thompson examined both, then looked at Victoria expectantly. "Miss Ashford, do you have a scanner to verify this passenger's reservation?" Victoria hesitated. She had been so certain of her assumptions, so confident in her prejudice, that she hadn't considered what would happen when those assumptions were proven wrong. Yes, but I can tell just by looking that there's been some kind of mistake. Scan it, please." The request was polite, but carried the weight of authority. Victoria had no choice but to pull the handheld scanner from her belt and point it at Alicia's phone screen. The device beeped once, and a green light flashed. Passenger Brooks Alicia. Seat 1A, status priority VIP, special handling required. The reading appeared on Victoria's scanner screen, visible to everyone nearby. Officer Thompson looked at the display, then at Victoria with an expression of professional disappointment. "Miss Ashford, this passenger's credentials are valid. Her seat assignment is correct." What exactly is the problem here? Victoria stared at the scanner as if it had betrayed her. The evidence was right there, undeniable and clear, but she still couldn't process that her assumptions had been completely wrong. But look at her," Victoria stammered. "She doesn't look like she belongs in first class." Officer Rodriguez stepped closer to Victoria, his voice carrying a warning. "Miss Ashford, you just admitted to discriminating against a passenger based on her appearance. Do you understand that what you're describing is illegal?" Richard Blackwood, who had been watching the exchange with growing unease, decided to insert himself into the situation. "Officers, I think you're misunderstanding what happened here. This woman has been disruptive and argumentative throughout this entire process. The flight attendant was just trying to maintain order and security. Officer Thompson turned to face him. And you are Richard Blackwood, Seat 2A. I'm a frequent flyer with this airline, and I can tell you that this kind of behavior is exactly what's wrong with air travel today. What kind of behavior? Richard gestured toward Alicia with obvious disdain. Passengers who try to cause problems and then claim discrimination when they're held to reasonable standards. What standards? Appropriate dress. Proper conduct, basic respect for the premium cabin experience. Officer Thompson looked at Alicia, who was still standing quietly, speaking calmly, and showing no signs of the disruptive behavior Richard was describing. Sir, this passenger appears to be conducting herself appropriately. She's spoken respectfully, complied with requests for identification, and hasn't raised her voice or caused any kind of disturbance. Well, she's being argumentative about her seat assignment. Her seat assignment that we've just verified as correct. Richard's mouth opened and closed as he realized he had just undermined his own argument. But instead of backing down, instead of recognizing that he might be wrong, he doubled down on his prejudice. Look, I don't care what that computer says. I've been flying first class for 20 years, and I know what a first-class passenger looks like. She doesn't belong here, and everyone can see it. The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. Around the cabin, passengers were recording every word. James Peterson's live stream had gained over 3,000 viewers. Comments were exploding across social media platforms, and Richard Blackwood was destroying his own reputation one sentence at a time. Marcus Williams stood up again from his seat in economy. Officer, I'm an attorney, and I want to state for the record that what we're witnessing is clear-cut discrimination. This passenger has been subjected to different treatment based solely on her race and appearance. Stay out of this, Richard snapped. This is between the flight crew and a passenger who's trying to scam her way into first class. Actually, Sir Officer Thompson interjected. This is a legal matter now. Federal law prohibits discrimination in air travel based on race, and we have multiple witnesses documenting exactly that kind of discrimination. Victoria was beginning to panic. The situation was spiraling out of control. The evidence was clearly against her, and she was starting to realize that her career might be in jeopardy. Officers, I was just following standard security procedures. When passengers don't match the profile of typical first-class travelers, we're supposed to verify their credentials. You were supposed to verify her credentials. Officer Rodriguez said, which you could have done by scanning her boarding pass. Instead, you refused to scan it and made assumptions based on her appearance. I was protecting the integrity of the first-class cabin. From what Victoria struggled to find an answer that wouldn't sound overtly racist. From inappropriate passengers who might disrupt the experience for other travelers. What made this passenger inappropriate? And there it was, the question that would force Victoria to either admit her prejudice or continue lying in front of witnesses and cameras. She chose poorly. She's dressed inappropriately. She doesn't act like she understands first-class etiquette. And she became argumentative when I tried to redirect her to her proper seat. Her proper seat being 1A in first class, which we've now verified is correct. Victoria's silence was damning. Even she could hear how her arguments sounded when reflected back to her. That was when Derek Morrison appeared at the aircraft door. The check-in supervisor, who had been suspended pending investigation, had somehow talked his way past security and made his way to the plane, apparently determined to support Victoria's accusations. Officers. I'm glad you're here, Derek said breathlessly as he boarded the aircraft. I tried to warn you about this passenger at check-in. She's been running some kind of scam all morning, trying to use fraudulent credentials to access services she hasn't paid for. Officer Thompson turned to face him with obvious exasperation. Mr. Morrison, you were suspended pending investigation. You're not supposed to be in this area. I know, but I couldn't let this fraud get away with it. She probably has accomplices waiting to meet her in Miami. This is clearly part of some larger operation. Derek's conspiracy theories were so ridiculous that even Richard looked uncomfortable. But Derek wasn't done making things worse. Officers, you need to understand, people like her have been targeting airlines for months. They use stolen credit card information to book tickets, create fake boarding passes, and then cry discrimination when they get caught. It's an organized scam, and she's probably just one member of a larger network. The silence that followed Derek's rant was deafening. Even Victoria looked embarrassed by his wild accusations. Officer Rodriguez was making notes in his incident report. And Alicia Brooks stood perfectly calm, watching her tormentors dig their own graves with every word. Mr. Morrison, Officer Thompson said slowly, "You just accused this passenger of credit card fraud, identity theft, and being part of a criminal conspiracy. Do you have any evidence to support these accusations? Just look at her. Does she look like she can afford first class? That's not evidence, sir, that's prejudice." Derek's face flushed red. "I've been working in this industry for 12 years. I know suspicious behavior when I see it. What you see is a black woman in casual clothes, and you've assumed she's a criminal based on that observation alone. That's not... I didn't say anything about race. You didn't have to. Your actions spoke louder than words. Around the cabin, passengers were recording every word of Derek's meltdown. His conspiracy theories and obvious prejudice were being broadcast live to thousands of viewers. The hashtag Skyalite Discrimination was trending nationally. And somewhere in corporate offices, executives were watching their company's reputation crumble in real time. But the disaster wasn't over yet, because Alicia Brooks was about to reveal exactly who she was, and the people who had discriminated against her were about to learn what real power looked like. Jessica Williams, the young flight attendant who had watched this entire confrontation unfold, finally found her courage. "Miss Ashford," she said quietly, "maybe we should just apologize to Miss Brooks and get the flight ready for departure." Victoria spun around to face her subordinate with fury. "Jessica, I told you to go check on economy passengers. This situation doesn't concern you." "But she's right," Jessica replied, her voice growing stronger. "We should have just scanned her boarding pass from the beginning. All of this could have